Hey folks, so today we will talk about more generic topic because this week we all read everywhere. There's also an article because we refactor to the monolith and everything gets super fast, and a lot of critics around the microservices and all of the things. So let's try to understand what are the scale between the monolithic systems and microservices, and maybe we have something smaller than the microservices or something better or something different. I already have this talk in Ukrainian, but I decided to translate it in English. So, I'm pretty much sure that right now we have a huge generation of developers that never see the monoliths in their lives, and actually they all start from the microservice madness and so on. Because if you will go to the interview and people will ask you about the microservices, so they expect to hear that monolith is horrible and bad, and microservice is something that will save our life and is the best architecture ever invented and so on. So, I'm more about the purposeful architecture and the common sense, and actually, we take in two extremes because we have a lot of solutions that's sitting in the middle. So let's take a look to the monolith and why monolith is not so cool. Yeah, it's clear that usually we have the horrible picture that we have the huge system that, I don't know, 2,000 engineers working simultaneously. Somebody deploys some tiny page and broke everything, and our UI together with the server side, together with the database is tightly coupled, and actually we have one big huge database that have some super slow foreign keys, and half of this logic maybe even live in a database. So welcome. It's the projects that we usually wrote in 2006 or 2010, so it was made this way. But it's not fully true, because we have quite different ways of building the monolithic systems that could have some good characteristics of the microservices, because, for example, we could have the monolith, that it's the monolithic application where every module have the clear interfaces. These interfaces could be in memory interfaces, or these interfaces could communicate over the pipes or any kind of other channels that are a bit cheaper than network-to-network communication and so on. So you could follow the rules that, the modules do not use directly each other, do not create the cyclic dependencies, that every module have the separate set of tables and schemas in a database, or even separate databases. In this case, you have the separation of concerns. You give people possibility to build independently, concentrate the knowledge, but you still deploy it as one big piece of software. So it's not always bad. So the monolith, it's one good thing. Another one good thing that sit in between of the monolith and microservices, it's self-contained systems. So the theory of the self-contained systems are super simple, that instead of the bunch of the microservices front end and some independent thing, you have the system that working on some isolated domain, isolated bounded context. So it's usually came together with the domain-driven design, and you have one piece that's responsible for all layers like front-end, back-end, and the database, and you deploy them together. So there's some kind of combination of micro front-end, couple of microservices that connected together, and the database layer. So yet another approach, and ABAP and SAP even have this approach in the 70s, that you have a monolithic system, but you have a federated monolith with the possibility to swap modules on go. So it's the good thing for the systems that have the high load, and you don't have the possibility to shut down the system, to update the system. So you could just replace the part of the implementation. So a couple of frameworks give you this possibility. For example, Microsoft had MEF. You could read about some federated monoliths in agony. I have a video about the federated monoliths in my own channel, but the idea is simple, that you stream the code as a modules. So you use the this REST feature like code on demands, and you could load the code actually, and it's a simple thing. So we have yet another interesting story. It's called the Polylith. Polylith, it's a new framework. It's more popular on the Clojure community, that you have the function as the building block, you have the base, you have some other things like project, you have deployment, so you could combine different building blocks to something deployable, deploy it, you have a huge monorepo of the building blocks, so it's flexible enough. And it's still sit in between of the monolithic and microservice architecture. So what's actually wrong with the microservices? First of all, when you go to the microservice world, you increase the complexity heavily. Then you should have something that allows you to operate and deploy, so you automatically should have something like Kubernetes or Elastic instances, or you shift a lot of load to the infrastructure, and you should have the infrastructure knowledge in your team, and maybe you simply don't have these resources, or maybe you simply don't have the money to do it. So, because the Kubernetes is not for free, the hosted Kubernetes on Amazon is not for free, complexity grow, your communication from in-memory communication turn to network communication, and you know, you increase the surface of the security attacks and vulnerabilities, because right now you need to secure all this communication, you need to invent some identification and authorization mechanism, and think about the traffic from north and traffic from west to east and so on. So it's, you know, the complexity, the security concerns and all other things grow exponentially. But what the main benefits of the microservices, that if you first of all complete independence, but as I already explained, we could achieve the independent development and independent deployment with the federated monoliths, with the hot reload modules and all other things. But the main benefit of the microservices, on my honest opinion, is the possibility to control and scale the load. Because if you have the different part of systems that are scalable differently, and you have completely different load on the different services, then you don't need to deploy the multiple instances of monolith. You need to just deploy the more microservices that have the higher use and higher demand, and it's the main benefit. But you know, the most common architecture based on the microservices is the monolith, yeah, that you just, not the monolith, but monolithic microservices, that, you know, boss came to you, say that I read the book about the microservices, tomorrow we migrate to microservices, you split randomly your monolith to 45 microservices, and right now there's the huge madness. So, you know, when you build in the microservice architecture, you need to have the proper domain-driven design, understand the boundaries, and the problem that in a new product the boundaries could be quite different, could be not so fixed, and the best way to do it actually is to start with the gateway and the monolithic system, and then define the boundaries, and over the time migrate some piece of system that have quite different load, dedicated domain to the microservice world. So that's the process, and maybe this process will never happen. So what we have smaller than microservices, because microservices is not the end of the story. So you could have the nano service that focused even more, that instead of focusing on some boundary and domain, it could focus on some single operation. And here we could have the actor systems, and you know, to scale the actor is much cheaper than to scale the microservice. And we have some independent agent systems that are close to the actor systems. So we have lambdas and the serverless, and serverless, it's the same. You have the scalable operations, you have the step functions, you have all other things. So it's even smaller and granular than the microservices. We have a huge movement right now in the Wasm cloud that you could deploy Wasm modules and Wasm-based functions as a containers that are much cheaper than the Docker containers and much cheaper than Kubernetes operations. So we have this movement to the serverless. But all these things have a price, and orchestration of such systems have a price. So monoliths are not bad, microservices are not bad. The common sense actually matter, and you need to understand the needs and scalability patterns of your system to take the decisions what fits best in a current load, in a current growth of your company, in a current maturity of your team. And I recommend a quite good book, The Strategic Monoliths and Microservices. You will find a lot of insights there. I have heard a lot of interesting stories how we migrate from the monolith to microservices. But I see more and more stories that people tell how they migrate from the microservices to semi-monolithic systems. And I believe that it's more about the proper design of domains and proper design of boundaries. Because usually people take the extreme and try to separate every entity to the microservice. Please don't do this, it doesn't make sense. So I'm keen to talk about this more. If you have some good examples of the migration from one world to another, share with me. I will be happy to hear your story. I will share some links, I will share some reference to the self-contained systems, to the system of systems, and modules and all those things. Some of them came from Java world, some of them came from Clojure world, but they are applicable independently from different languages. Follow my Medium articles, subscribe to my channel. I will be happy to hear more from you. Choose.